What is the second death in the book of Revelation? As misunderstood as this concept is in the Bible, the answer is surprisingly simple. The second death is actually Christianity 101 and should be the first thing every Christian learns. Now, this concept of the second death in the book of Revelation has long been a favorite of annihilationists. They assume that Christ raises all of mankind from death so he can tell them how angry he is with them and so he can kill them deader than dead. Of course, those who hold to the doctrine of eternal punishment see the second death as metaphorical for eternal punishment in a lake of fire with sulfur. But is that what God does? Annihilate people or punish them without end? No, dear Christian believer, I promise you that is not who God is. Let's find out what the second death actually is. The book of Revelation 21, beginning in verse 5. He who sits on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." He said, "Write, for these words of God are faithful and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give freely to him who is thirsty from the spring of the water of life. He who overcomes, I will give him these things. I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly, unbelieving, sinners, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their part is in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. So there's the answer. The second death is the lake of fire. So what is the lake of fire, and why is sulfur added? Does sulfur make the fire more painful, increasing the suffering? Is sulfur used by God to create unpleasant fumes for the victims of eternal punishment? If you're an annihilationist, does sulfur make someone deader than dead? Why is there sulfur in the lake of fire? This is an important question because the answer changes everything. From the perspective of the doctrine of eternal punishment or annihilationism, this added detail of sulfur in the lake of fire makes no sense at all. But from the perspective of the ancient doctrine of the Apokatastasis, universal salvation, what the church originally believed, it makes perfect sense. As I have previously pointed out, the lake of fire is not a lake at all, but rather a tiny pool of molten gold known as a refiner's crucible. For those of you who know some basic chemistry, when metal and sulfur are heated together, a strong chemical reaction takes place. This chemical reaction was well known even in ancient times and was used to eliminate impurities from the gold. One of the most difficult problems for the gold refiner is getting unwanted metals out of the gold, impurities such as lead and iron. By adding small amounts of sulfur into the gold crucible, the unwanted metals are gobbled up by the sulfur in the chemical reaction, leaving the gold behind in a more purified state. The crucible is for silver and the furnace for gold, but the Lord tests the heart. This word picture of God testing the heart in a refiner's crucible was given to us first by King Solomon in the book of Proverbs. That is what the lake of fire is, the gold refiner's crucible, the testing of the heart. Now, on a side note, if you're an amateur gold refiner thinking about trying this ancient gold refining purification process by sulphurization, be warned, this creates a dangerous chemical reaction that can produce flammable gases, and you really need to know what you're doing. So unless you have a degree in chemistry and you really know what you're doing, I would urge you not to try this. The Apostle John is using this ancient method of gold refining as a word picture of God's restoration process for sinners. So why does the Apostle John call the lake of fire the second death? The concept of a second death should not seem strange to Christian believers because we experience the second death before we die. In the words of the Apostle Paul, I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I that live, but Christ living in me. Galatians 2:20. We who died to sin, how can we live in it any longer? Or don't you know that all we who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? We were buried therefore with him through baptism to death, that just like Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we also might walk in newness of life. That is why sinners are going to experience a second death, the gold refiner's crucible, for the same reason Christian believers have already experienced the second death, that they may walk in the newness of life. Who would have thought that the lake of fire, which is the refiner's crucible, would be the best friend of the doctrine of the Apokatastasis, universal salvation? The refiner's crucible, also known as the second death, is the word picture of God's restoration process for all mankind. This is why the original Greek-speaking Christians in the early centuries of the church believed in the Apokatastasis, because they understood these word pictures, where in later centuries, when the Bible was translated into other languages, this meaning became lost. And of course, we don't have to wait to be put through the refiner's crucible to experience newness of life. Christ is inviting us to lay our past sinful lives down and walk in newness of life today. This is the destiny of all mankind. And by giving your life to Jesus Christ today, in this life, Christ is offering you something extra as well. He is going to rescue you out of the consequences of the judgment, out of the gold refiner's crucible. This means followers of Christ walk directly into God's eternal glorious kingdom upon passing from this earth. But just because a sinner died apart from Christ doesn't mean God has given up on them. He has a plan to restore everyone to exactly what he created them to be. So the second death is not a picture of annihilationism. It is not a picture of eternal punishment. The second death is God's restoration process. All of mankind is going to experience the second death, now or later, because that is the path to eternal life, and how God is going to lead all of mankind into his glorious eternal kingdom. Thank you for listening. God bless you. Bye-bye.